Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Stephanie Grickney. I'm the CEO of Impact Finance Center. We're a nonprofit. You can think of us as an accelerator for the people with the money, the individuals, the foundations, the companies, and the wealthy families. And I'm here with my dear friend and colleague, Looney Libis. Looney has multiple hats. He is the founder and leads Realize Impact. He also, we're not going to go into it today, has an accelerator, a private labeled accelerator that's a regenerative accelerator called Fledge that I encourage you to go learn more about, and also Investor Flow. And when beautiful little new companies come out of this regenerative accelerator, such as they did in Africa, he took 27 of them and put them under a holding company called Africa Eats. So there's a lot to learn about Looney Libis. So I'm super excited. We're going to have most of this hour as a Q&A and conversation back and forth between Looney and me. But to level set, I wanted to start with just a community foundation 101 for about 10 to 12 minutes. And just to level set us. And this came about at our last investor club with OISTA. And I realized we have 69 native CDFIs. And I am sure there is one, if not 5 community foundations each one of you should be in connection with. And so in order to do that, we wanted to kind of give you a bit of a one-on-one presentation and then talk you through some of the questions you might get and how to respond to them. So welcome, Looney. Do you have any first words you'd like to say before I dive into it?
No, you go first. We'll plenty of words after that.
Okay, fantastic. So I will share my screen and we will get going on the rodeo. So community foundations and financial innovation and impact investing. And just to remind everyone who we are a partner of OISTA that we've been for over a year now. It's been a great joy. And the mission of our nonprofit is to identify, educate, and activate individuals and organizations to become impact investors and unlock what we call full spectrum catalytic capital. And we also create replicable and scalable, what we call community infrastructure, such as our Impact Investing Institute or our Indigenous Investor Club. We are a small and mighty team. We're kind of organized as a freelance consulting group. So we have 3 to 4 full-time staff, about 60 part-time staff, 5 to 15 students, a couple of data teams, and over 100 senior advisors. And we started off 100% philanthropically supported by large and local, we're based in Colorado, Denver, Colorado, philanthropic institutions. And I'm happy to report we're probably 80% to 90% earned revenue now. And a big part of what we're doing is taking the education and infrastructure that we developed in Colorado and partnering with other civil society organizations such as universities like the New School, Virginia Tech, membership organizations like Net Impact or TechSoup or RSF, and helping provide that education connection to them. We also do this in partnership with our partners at Full Spectrum Capital Partners, which is Taj James and Ruben Hernandez. And so our theory of change is actually really simple. We want to go find the people in the organizations with money. We want to educate them, and then we want to activate them to become full spectrum investors. And we do that really through 5 key ways. We can come in and evaluate your investment advisor. And if there's problems, we can help educate them and increase their capacity. Or if you want to fire them, we can help you fire them and find a new one. And then we have over 200 classes. If anyone that's attending this convening wants to take a class, we'll scholarship you if you need to for 100%. We have 50 of those classes up on the Impact Investing Institute. And then probably our most deep work is we do a lot of individual one-on-one training, small group training, and large group training. So this might be a brother and sister at a family foundation, or in one case, we have 5 foundations in a family office. And so we work with these entities to get activated. And once they're activated, you want to keep on your learning journey. And then you want to connect with all the amazing native CDFIs and invest. And we have over 85 tools across this toolbox. from your governance to your philanthropy to your direct investing and to your public investments. And it occurred to me during the last convening that community foundations are a really key actor for native CDFIs that I think are completely untapped. And there's an opportunity for us to work with the native CDFIs on the ground and help explain what a community foundation is, what's driving a community foundation from their perspective, and what the opportunities are, especially around donor advised funds. And so when we teach community foundations about financial innovation and impact investing, there's different arms of the community foundation. Unlike most private foundations, community foundations most of them have to fundraise themselves. And so they're trying to catch individuals or companies when they're ready to set up a foundation. And they say, well, you could set up your own private foundation, or you could set up a donor advised fund and just pay us 1%. You can almost think of it as fiscally sponsoring a private foundation. And so the philanthropic services and donor team is the team that is going out to fundraise. And so the Denver Foundation has close to 800 million in it, and it has 800 different donor advised fund holders. And every year that philanthropic services team has to go raise about $70 million in new donor advised funds. Many community foundations, some of them, I don't know what the percentage is, probably not most, also have sometimes an endowment and an unrestricted bucket of money. And that's their programs where they could give you a grant with that. And then we work with them to help do overall governance and endowment upgrades, train their staff and trustees, and help them think about strengthening their partnerships. So if you're sitting in the audience and you're like, how do I find my own community foundation? This is a map of the community foundations in the US. And I should also note, there are other donor advised fund providers such as Schwab and Fidelity and Vanguard and Impact Assets. And I'm thinking the biggest opportunity for most of you is to go knock on the door of your place-based community foundation and introduce yourself to them. So happy to reach out to us at info@Impact Finance Center, and we'll send you the link to find the community foundation locator, to find the community foundation that is close to you. There are approximately 700 community foundations, and in total 1,087 donor advised fund providers. So that's a lot of potential untapped capital we could be moving towards Indian country. And this is data from about 2 years ago, but there are approximately, and this is a subset of community foundations, over 733,000 different donor advised fund accounts, which you can think of these as all mini foundations. And the community foundation size can range from as little as $100,000 up to Silicon Valley Community Foundation that has over $10 billion in assets. But the point being is there's $87 billion available for both donations, and as you'll learn through our partnership with Realize Impact, through direct investments for you to work in native CDFIs. And I found this nice little cut sheet in preparation for this. I thought we'd walk through what's the difference between a community foundation and private foundation. And one example is in a community foundation, the donor recommends the grants to the nonprofit. In a private foundation, the donor elects a board to oversee the grant making. And in the community foundation, it's housed within the foundation's public charity status, and it has highly favorable tax deductions. Up to 60% of your adjusted gross income in cash can go to your donor advised fund versus only 30% in your private foundation. In a private foundation, the IRS must approve the tax exempt status. Additionally, in a community foundation, they try to involve community experts. In the best of worlds, it's participatory grant making versus a private foundation has more experts and researches and evaluates those own grants. If you have a donor advised fund, say at a community foundation at the Denver Foundation, there's no minimum distribution requirements versus at a private foundation, you have to distribute 5% of your distribution. of the whole endowment or donor advised fund in that case, or sorry, of the whole private foundation's endowment, not donor advised fund. If you'd like to learn more, my mentor, Kathy Merchant, was key to getting the grant and writing this community foundation field guide to impact investing. And I do encourage you greatly, if you're like, we're interested, let's go do this. Try to understand the point of view of the community foundation and understand, like, how do we help solve their problems? And we'll talk about some of the questions you can ask. And we also asked you to get really clear on what your ask is. And I mentioned this at the opening session, is figure out your ratio of grants versus loans you need. So in the case of OESTA, with the Reese Foundation, when we asked them what they needed, they said, you know, for every $100,000, we need $25,000 of grants at negative 100% return and a $75,000 loan at 2%. And that really kind of works itself out as $100,000 at negative 24%. And so work to get really clear, and you don't have to explain the negative 100% to the community foundation, but just be clear about what the ratio is of your grants versus loans that you're going to be asking for. And so as I transition and open it up for Looney, here's what I think, if I was in your shoes, what I would take as next steps. Locate your community foundation. If necessary, if you don't know anybody on the board or the staff, find a partner to introduce you or reach out to the philanthropic services team. You are welcome to reach out to myself and Looney. We can connect you. If we know somebody there, we will happily make that introduction. First, ask if they have any donors or existing programming supporting Indigenous communities. If they don't, ask if they would consider hosting a single event. And I say this because make it a small ask that they can say yes to that first event. And then here's the kicker about the loans from the donor advised funds is ask if they offer direct investing via their donor advised funds or their endowment. And if not, ask them if they've heard of Realize Impact or if they want that introduction. And so I'm going to put up my contact information, info@impactfinancecenter.org. And happily we'll connect you to Looney Libis at the end of this presentation. But Looney, I want you to start with the history of Realize Impact. Like, why was there a need to create this public charity? Explain what was the impetus for doing this for you?
Well, the public charity at the beginning was an accident. So 2013 is when we got started. We were too far ahead of the curve at the time. We were trying to figure out how to pool together money from high net worth individuals to make impact investments. That was the general theme. And I came across one lawyer I knew, and she said, oh, you're looking down the wrong path. What you want is a nonprofit. And so she set up the nonprofit, and not everything she thought was going to worked. So that was back in 2013. Fast forward to 2019, and we kept it around. It's hard to make a nonprofit. It's easy to keep one. So we kept it around. And then 2019 comes around, and we keep seeing the same struggling pattern over and over again. So Stephanie said, ask the community foundation if they'll make a direct investment. You know, of the 1,000 that exist, 700 and whatever you put up there, but 1,000 that exist, like 5 of them will do a direct investment, maybe 10. It's really rare. And so I live in Seattle, and one of the rare ones is Seattle Foundation. It's $1 billion foundation. And yes, they will make, or they would make back then, a direct investment, whether it be a loan or an equity investment or whatever. But in 2019, they decided that they didn't like that anymore, and they weren't going to do it anymore. And that was a problem because my day job with Fledge, we are a recipient of money that came through the donor advised fund. So about 20% of all the capital I raised came through that donor advised funds or impact assets. And when you're, and they were actually the largest investor in the fund. And when your largest investor says they won't invest anymore, that's a problem. So I went around and I chatted with them, and I chatted with Impact Assets, and I chatted with a whole bunch of other community foundations. And the answer was they just don't know, they don't understand how to invest. It's just not something that they are comfortable doing. They don't have anyone on staff who has a long history of making investments. And so it all culminated down to a meeting in December of 2019, pre-pandemic, in-person meeting. And we were talking about ways forward. The room was full of 10 investors, 10 active investors who had donor advised funds at Seattle Foundation, but were investors as well. About 10 staff. I was there in the room. My staff's not at Seattle Foundation. And we came down to a solution. Like someone in the room popped up a solution. They said, well, what if there was an organization out there that was a public charity and it could just take donations because it's a public charity? And what if that public charity then turned around and made investments? And then what if when there was a return, whatever the principal and interest or the return on investment, whatever you want to call it, when there was money back from the investment, what if it just got donated back to the community foundation? Would that work? And so we left the room with a plan. We talked about it with Seattle Foundation. They finally, about a month later, said yes. And so that's the service that Realize Impact is providing. We launched that February of 2020, literally like 2 weeks before the whole country got locked down, or at least Washington State got locked down. And it works. And we've helped about 110 donors move millions of dollars of investments. We've made 25 investments in a year and change. And basically it works. We at Realize Impact, we're a bunch of for-profiteers who happen to have an accidental nonprofit. We know how to invest. We've been doing that for years. And so we have the tools of the public charity and everything that comes with that, but the know-how on how to invest. So for us, 25 investments in a year or 25 investments in 15 months was no big deal. To Seattle Foundation, that was more than they had ever done in the history of the organization. And it's more than most community foundations have ever done or ever thought of doing.
So I, back in 2012, I represented an $18 million donor, and we went to the Denver Foundation and we said, we want to do a loan directly to our nonprofit, to the Alliance Center. And we ended up doing a $9.5 million 1% loan. And it was a heavy lift. And just to reiterate why it's difficult for community foundations is, from their point of view, they're actually competing with the Fidelities and the Vanguards and the Schwabs that have lower fees. So they're sitting here going, well, I don't necessarily have the expertise on staff. I don't want to charge more fees to pay for getting the expertise on staff. I don't necessarily want to become a bank. And even though my donor just asked me to do a loan or an equity investment or a revenue-based financing to a for-profit, that makes me a little nervous, even though I know it's legal. I've been told it's a legal thing to do. And so Realize Impact is really that turnkey solution that makes it easy, where it's like the donor advised fund goes to their community foundation and says, can you do it? And they're like, oh, we're nervous. And so you just make a donation from your donor advised fund to the public charity Realize Impact. It's a 501c3. It's super easy. If it's less than $10,000, then Realize Impact doesn't even charge an upfront fee. If it's $10,000 or more, there's a $500 fee. We at Realize Impact are a nonprofit. Almost all of us are volunteers. We make the direct investment. And then if the money comes back, we return 99% of it back to either the donor advised fund or the public charity. Do you want to talk about if a native CDFI gets a foothold in there and they're like, well, who's this Realize Impact? Why don't you tell them about the master service agreement we have with Seattle Foundation and the Community Foundation of Utah? Because it's not like it's our first rodeo with Realize Impact. So, yeah, so how should they respond? Yeah.
So we as Realize Impact wouldn't do this unless we had a partner that said yes. So we have a board, right? We're a standard looking nonprofit from that end. And so Seattle Foundation was the first one to say yes. Again, it was February of last year. They said yes. They signed an agreement. They wrote the agreement. Like it's not even our contract. It's their contract. So we have we call it a master service agreement, which basically says that if one of their donors says they want to make a direct investment, they'll make it happen through Realize Impact. We are their, I don't think the word exclusive shows up in there, but we're their exclusive provider for doing this. And then we talked to a few other places, a few other community foundations. We've received money from many, many, many community foundations, including Silicon Valley and Marin Community Foundation and Tacoma Community Foundation I lost count. And Fidelity and Schwab and Vanguard Charitable, and Tides and Bessemer Trust. And oh my God, I can't, just an aside, I had no idea that every bank has a donor advised fund. So all the checks wind up on my desk, and check will show up from the Bank of America, charitable giving trust. I'm like, okay, who knew? Anyway, so Community Foundation of Utah was the second community foundation to sign up as a master service agreement. They again wanted the comfort in knowing that there's a organization that can do this for them, so they didn't have to figure it out. They had a bunch of donors that wanted to make it happen, and so we signed a master service agreement with them, and we'll sign more with other community foundations.
Let's talk about the how you can shift power if you're a native CDFI. I was thinking about this morning, and I thought, yes, go find somebody who knows a trustee or the staff. Call us if you can't find a connection. If none of us have any connections, call up the philanthropic services provider. The other thing, though, to realize is what a community foundation has to do in order to achieve their mission. And a big part of it is most of them have to fundraise. So I was thinking the minimum size for a donor advised fund to open, probably, I don't know what you've seen, Lenny, I think it ranges from $500 to $10,000.
Yeah, I don't think there's a minimum of Fidelity, but community foundations, I think typically you'd see 25,000 would be the smallest reasonable.
I've seen as low as 5 and 10.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll take 5, but they're taking 5 because they expect there to be 50 someday.
Well, and my only point being, a native CDFI could actually open up a donor fund as a way to shift that power. Do you want to talk a little bit from your experience about basically showing up as a asset steward or asset owner around the table versus actually, asking them to put their programming your way?
Yeah. So let me just, I think that was unclear to the audience on what you meant there. What you can do in this world of philanthropic capital, keep in mind that just IRS rules say that once the money is donated into the philanthropic world, it has to stay there. More or less, it can be invested out, but once philanthropic capital is philanthropic, it's philanthropic, which means that as a CDFI, what you could do is when you're receiving donations in, rather than receiving it to the CDFI, you could open up a donor advised fund somewhere and have the money donated into that account that you control, and then you could have it lent back out to you as a CDFI through Realize Impact. And the power that changes when you do that is now you are an organization with a donor advised fund. Now you are a peer to all these high net worth individuals who have donor advised funds. And that changes the relationship between you and the community foundation from, recipient of their money, which when you get their money, they have to go fill up the other side. They have to go get more money, to someone who is one of their customers. And so you'll get a different perspective on how donor advised funds work as their customer. I also want to say, in the slide deck, you glossed over it really quickly. One of the differences between donor advised fund and private foundation is private foundations have to give away 5% per year by law. Well, the DAFs don't have to give away anything, but it turns out that on average, 20% of it gets donated. So far more gets donated each year. So one of the challenges of raising money every year is because a lot of it is flowing through. And so when it goes all the way up, I've heard numbers of 25 or 30% at the Fidelities and Vanguards of the world. So they're really just stopping off points for a DAF is really just a place to put some money aside that will then be granted out later. And this whole idea that you can invest it instead of granting it out, it's just not well known yet. That's the novelty of why my little nonprofit here, our little nonprofit, was able to spin this up, right? Make this new service, and no one else was doing it, because this whole idea of investing the donor advised fund money is just I can't say it's new, it's just nascent at the moment.
It is. It's actually the Tax Reform Act law goes back to 1969, and so I think getting coached as a native CDFI of what's your real ask? So if you get that first donor from a donor advised fund that wants to do it, make sure you say, I want a grant paired with a loan, and help them think through the math from that perspective.
Well,
And then
I gotta jump in. The different kinds of asks you can make. So if you're just out there hand open saying, I need money to run the CDFI, right? CDFI is run at a loss. Everyone I know runs at a loss. So you need the grant money to keep the lights on. You need the money to pay the people so that you can make the loans. There's a limited amount of grant money out there. There's more money out there when you ask for a loan. So if you turn to these CDFI, so you turn to these DAFs, where they're paying 1 to 2% per year just to have it, right? One reason why the money moves through them quickly is because there's a charge for having the money sitting there. So they're paying 1 or 2%. If you can pay them as a loan and pay them interest 1 or 2%, then there's a huge pool of money out there for the CDFIs to tap into with that ask of, sign up for the CDFI here in Seattle, the big one, does notes for like 0.5%, 1%, 2%, depending on how long you leave the money with them. So every single person who donates to the CDFI, you should be asking them, well, do you want to also buy a note, right? And by the way, did you know you could buy the note using your DAF, which will be news to the DAF holders because, again, this is a nascent service. And a lot of them will go, oh, how's that work? And then you tell them, oh, there's this nonprofit that runs this service. They'll turn your DAF money into loans, right? It doesn't have to be 1 or 2%. It could be a little higher if you can afford it. But there's again, I don't remember the number Stephanie put up, but it ended in billions. It was 2 digits in billions. It's a huge amount of money out there that is otherwise not doing anything. It is literally just sitting in the DAF, invested in Wall Street, right? Not doing anything good for the world. And then there's other money out there for other things as well, like I do.
Looney, we had a question from the audience. How many native-led donor advised funds are there? And I am not familiar with a single. Oh, actually, Sarah Eaglehart at Amalgamated Charitable Foundation has that foundation is a native-led donor advised fund. So I have one, but I am not familiar with very many.
I can't think of any out here. Yeah, I don't know of any in Washington State.
And so here's another interesting tool you can use, a little lesson learned. If you have a big donor that donates to you year over year, and it can even be a small donor, you can think of in some ways, I know you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to like give an extra 1% away. But if you think about that 1% as kind of your tax or your payment to unlock the donor advised funds at your community foundations, it can be a really powerful tool. So I once represented an $18 million donor advised fund. We actually asked for 26 policy changes at a very large community foundation, including allowing us to create a affinity group. In this case was for environmental funders. You could, basically go to, if you had the CD by yourself, if you had a large influx of cash that you wanted to park at a donor advised fund, or you had a donor that was willing to park some of the grant money they were going to give you and run it through the community foundation in your donor advised fund at first glance, that gives you a leverage point. And yes, I have an example of an $18 million donor advised fund, but I once had a $100,000 donor advised fund that wanted to give Impact Finance Center a $100,000 loan. And so I basically called 5 community foundations and said, I have 2 weeks notice. I have a donor advised fund from Schwab. They want to move to a local community foundation, but the requirement is they want to do a direct investment to us as a nonprofit. 2 out of the 5 currently did not have a direct investing program. All 5 within 2 weeks said they would set one up. And if you think about that, that's 1% on a $100,000 fee. The irony is you couldn't give a community foundation a grant for $100,000 to get them to set up a donor advised fund. But the folks on the philanthropic services teams are really have a very strong mandate to go open up more donor advised funds and raise more donor advised fund money. So that's the key of connecting with that philanthropic services team, which seems a little counterintuitive. Most of the time you think of going to the program team, which I'm not saying don't go to the program team, but know that the entrepreneurs within a community foundation tend to sit on the philanthropic services team. Looney, do you have any, do you want to give us a couple of successes, like tangible successes that we've done through Realize Impact to make investments so people can see how we've taken money from a donor advised fund, it's gone to Realize Impact, and we've made the investment?
Yeah, so let's talk about the biggest investment we've made to date. It's called the Trust Fund. It got started in the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic last year, first week in March. It's a 0% interest loan fund for companies in the global South, and specifically how they found them, we can leave that aside, but 0% interest loans. So imagine you're trying to raise a fund that's giving out 0% interest loans. So their promise to donors was they promised to lose 2%. Like in the realm of for-profits, we would say that's a negative 2% guaranteed loss, which it sounds weird in my head. Should sound weird to you.
Well, and I should say, I tease Looney about this. It's a 98% increase to giving your money away as a grant. So,
yeah. So if you wanted to just grant to these companies, they're all little for-profits out in the global South, right? It's not the kind of organizations that typically get grants. So loans is the right structure. 0% interest loans is the right amount given the pandemic and all the issues. This is the global South. The pandemic's not going to end there this year. It's going to end next year, hopefully, maybe 2023. And so this organization is a for-profit company that runs other loan programs. Said, we're going to start the trust fund. They went out to their prospects, pitched them on this idea, ended with that line of, oh, by the way, you could use your donor advised fund if you want. And last year, I don't know, we did about $600,000 or $700,000 got raised for that in like 3 months. And last year was extraordinary, but Trust Fund 2 just got spun up, and I don't know, we moved about $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 into that. I just sent them a very large wire. So they've raised over $1.2 million, $1.3 million. And they've only promised, you can try this with your community if you want, but they promise that they will at least lose 2%. It's 2% plus whatever losses are. There's no loan loss reserves, no capital stacked, no other capital in here that's going to take first losses. This is negative, 2% management fee minus losses, and yet it raised over $1 million, and it did so in a year. Like the right story at the right time. And when you talk to the donors on why they would do this, and I don't know these donors, but I know others like them, they're like, well, these companies will, they won't make it without this. Like they need this. If I lose a few percent, what's the big deal? It's already charity. Like that's a line that comes up a lot. I've already given the money away. It's already charity. Donor advice for money, just to be clear, looks and feels like it's the donor's money, but it's not. It's been given to charity. They just have some control over it, or a feeling of control over it, but it's already gone. In their minds, it's been given away. So if it loses some money, that's fine. If it doesn't earn enough to keep up with inflation, that's fine. It's charity.
Well, and Looney, the counterpoint of it is that still feels like a loss to me versus I frame it the opposite, right? That money is negative 100%. And wow, what if I could recycle it once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, right? That makes it feel a little bit to me as cup half full versus cup half empty.
Sure. And just because that's not all we do. Another good example I'd say is the most recent or the second most recent was like Gigawatt Global. So Gigawatt Global is, get complicated here. It's an Israeli run fund, but the fund is based out of the Netherlands, and it only invests in Africa. Just welcome to my world, the global nature of impact investing. And they're installing utility grade solar projects in challenging countries, I would call it. The latest project is in Burundi, poorest nation on the planet. And so they're not putting solar on people's roofs. They're literally setting up gigantic fields of megawatts of power for the country of Burundi. And so why are they doing this? Nobody else is doing this. Like they're not competing on and bidding. they're making money. They're doing it because it makes money. They're, I don't remember what they promised their investors, but it was not a negative. It was a positive number. It was a nice positive number, 5, 6, 7, 8%. And we got to do one donation so far into them, or one investment, with more coming. I think there's a check sitting under this computer that's destined to go there.
The other great part about Realize Impact is it's not just a donor advised fund from a community foundation that can use Realize Impact for direct investing. The community foundation's endowment can use Realize Impact for direct investing, but you could also, a corporate foundation or a private foundation, family foundation, can also use Realize Impact.
Or just the latest check was just a check from a human being. Like, it wasn't from a DAF, it wasn't from a foundation. It was from a high net worth individual. It was destined for the trust fund, this 0%. He just wrote a check. We're a charity, which means any money given to us is a tax deductible donation. So you can skip the DAF. Just to be clear, if you find a high net worth individual, they don't have to have a DAF. They can just donate cash, or we've done 3 or 4 times people have donated shares through us. So the stock market's at an all-time high, which means if the, again, high net worth individuals were to sell those shares, they would pay at the moment 23% tax on it, which they should, but there's a way around that, which is they could donate the shares. And if they donate the shares, then they get a tax deduction for the value of the shares. They get to take money off their taxes, and we just turn that into cash and we'll invest it just like any other cash. So they get a tax deductible donation, taking winnings that they never actually cashed in on.
You know what drives me crazy is when awesome, high impactful CDFIs, such as native CDFIs, are doing direct investing, and impact investor calls, and they're like, hey, can I do 5,000 or 10,000? And for me, that's high transaction costs for a CDFI to do. Do you want to talk about Realize Impact Philanthropic Investment Fund as a way possibly CDFIs could also use to aggregate some of the small impact investments?
Yeah. Okay. So this is another, I'd say another straw on the camel's back in 2019. There's a group in Seattle. It's an angel group based in Seattle, but national. They do clean tech. So they're called E8 Angels. They decided, the new executive director there decided that he wanted to create a fund that would mitigate climate. And he came from the nonprofit world. So he had this idea that the easiest way to raise money to help with the climate was through philanthropic giving, through donor advised funds and appreciated share donations. So he created Decarbonate Fund, or he had the idea for Decarbonate Fund, and didn't want to actually run it. So he doesn't have, just like the just like the community foundations, he had no interest in running a fund. He had no experience in running a fund. He didn't want to actually do the fund part. He just wanted to do the fundraising part. So we stepped up and we did our first agreement with E8 to create the Decarbonate Fund. It's a turnkey fund operated by Realize Impact. And so the only difference between that and what we do for everybody else is that the donors say, oh, I like this idea. I'll put my money in the Decarbonate Fund. And then later, there's a small committee that says, okay, take the money out of the Decarbonate Fund and go put it in these. We did 3 investments last year. And I can't remember off the top of my head. One of them was taking carbon and, oh shoot, it wasn't the one sticking it in soda bottles. Anyway, so we set up a turnkey fund. That's kind of the key here. And then we did it again with a group called Sprout. We have the Rise Impact Fund that is a pool of capital to invest in artisanal companies around the world. And then we did it again with Mission Driven Finance, which is a for-profit fund manager. So this is probably the most equivalent. So they can then add that one line again to all their pitches, which is, oh, or you can use your donor advised fund. And when someone says how, they go, oh, well, you just donate to the Mission Driven Finance Fund. And then we will in turn invest it in the fund you're interested in. And we've done a few more since then as well. So we're happy to spin up a fund that looks and feels and acts like any other fund out there. You do the fundraising, we'll do the investing. And same
Fantastic.
terms apply. It's still $500 per investment per donor, and 99% back to wherever they want when the money comes back.
And the last arrow in the quiver is right now is fiscal sponsorship. Do you want to talk about that service also that Realize Impact offers?
Yeah, we've been doing that. So that's what kept us going since 2013. We fiscally sponsor, we're a little strange. We mostly fiscally sponsor for-profits, which sounds like it shouldn't be possible, but we only work with mission-driven for-profits. So we work with companies that are solving one of the big problems of the world, right? One of the SDGs is how we usually measure it. And if they need that umbrella of a nonprofit because they want to get donations, tax-deductible donations, or they've applied to a grant and the grantor requires the money to go to a nonprofit, yeah, we're happy to do that as well. And the terms are pretty simple. We send 97.5% of whatever gets donated on to the fiscally sponsored organization.
Fantastic. Looney, before I have us both share our contact information at the end, I have one last question for you. And also we have time for a question or two from the audience. If you have a question, feel free to reach out to us. I went briefly over like what to do if you're sitting, if you're sitting here as a native CDFI and you're like, I didn't even know a donor advised fund existed, and I didn't even know anything about a community foundation. Do you want to walk through, if you were essentially a newbie to this world, what you would do if you were them?
Yeah, I would start on Google. Well, I would start with the connections for that database, but while I was waiting for that response, I would go on Google and search Community Foundation and see what popped up. As long as the location's turned on, Google should find the local ones. They're not all named something Community Foundation or Community Foundation of something. Like the biggest one here in Seattle is Seattle Foundation. The word community doesn't show up. So you can't always go by that name to see what it is. And there's some others out there. Again, like Bessemer Trust is a donor advised fund. Bessemer is a big financial management institution. So there's others that are hiding out there. I might search for donor advised fund as well and just see what pops up. So I would go that path. I would go the path of assuming if you're running a CDFI, then you have donors and you have capital. And so go in not as someone who has their hand out looking for the capital from them. Go there with that mindset that, oh, maybe having a DAF that we control is useful, and starting the conversation with, okay, here's what we do. We're interested in opening a DAF, and see where that conversation goes. I think that's the better opening than the better way to start than yet another person showed up at the door asking for money, especially if you discover that the community foundation you're talking to has no discretionary money. It's very frustrating. I've talked to a bunch of community foundation people who are actually frustrated in their job because 99% of the money or 95% of the money of the org is in the form of a donor advised fund, which means they have no control over it. They can't choose where to put it. They can only, like once a year, they pick one thing or two things to give some money to. Like that's the discretionary pool. So they're not interested usually in yet another choice for that pool. They want something, they want to go talk about the meat of their business, which is donor advised funds.
Let's say I have a donor and I'm sitting here as a native CDFI, and they've said, oh, I have money in my donor advised fund. I'd like to invest in you, but I don't know how to do it. My community foundation can't do it. From that perspective, let's say the donor and the native CDFI go to the community foundation and say, hey, we have a way to make this happen that's super easy and low risk and smooth and fast that works for you. Describe the process of when the donor decides to say make a $250,000 recoverable grant to the native CDFI. How does that process work, and how much paperwork's involved, and how long does it take?
2 bits of paperwork. So the donor turns to their pool of capital, donor advised fund, and says, we recommend that you donate $250,500, throw a fee in there, to Realize Impact. And if they don't tell them what it's for, just to be clear, I've seen this multiple ways. If they just say, hey, we found this charity, it's called Realize Impact, make the donation, and they don't say anything past that, then usually, within a week, the money is sitting in the bank at Realize Impact. If they tell them that they want to make a loan and all that, then they start asking questions. We'll answer the questions. It happens. And then the money takes 2 weeks to get to Realize Impact, or a month, depending on how many questions. And then there's one form from our website. It's on realizeimpact.org. You go there and it's called a FIG, a philanthropic investment grant. And that's the form where you tell us what to do with the money. Because often people don't tell us until after the money's already in our bank. I find that to be backwards from the for-profit world, but it happens a lot. So money shows up. I need to know what to do with it. I need to get the staff working on the investment. So we need a form. It's a page and a half form. It's called a FIG. And basically it's just a recommendation. Here's where I would like the money invested. Here's a contact information to that organization. We'll send it through an investment committee. So we do have all the back end infrastructure for making investments and approving them. So we need to know what we're investing in. Legally, it's our money, so we need to approve this with our board. But our board has handed that off to an investment committee. The investment committee meets once a month. They need to know what the investment is, so we'll do the work internally to put all that together. Ideally, we get a pitch deck or a brief or something about the investment. And then within a month, we usually, from the very first recommendation, we've now made an investment. Usually takes about a month.
It's end of the year, we've got 2 weeks notice before the tax season or whatever the situation.
Yeah, we had a flurry last year.
Making it up. Can you go faster? Can we go faster? I should say.
We can, but just note that if it's coming from a donor advised fund, it's already been donated. So the deadline is get the money into the donor advised fund. If it's new capital to us, the deadline is getting us the capital by end of the year, not us making the investment. That's not the trigger for the tax deduction. So we had a flurry of money show up in December 26th through 31st. And then the first week in January, we made a bunch of investments.
I will say, when Looney called me a year and a half ago and said, let's do this thing together, I was a little, when I think of angel investing, I get frustrating. In addition to partnering with OESTA, partnering with Looney, and I serve on the investment committee and the board of Realize Impact has been one of the greatest joys of my life. So I'm really grateful you called me and invited me to participate, Looney. How do people get in touch with you personally? Because there's going to be hiccups, right? People are going to be like, wait, how does that thing work? Like, what's the best?
Instead of trying to share an email address, you'll forget. Literally on the realizeimpact.org website is a contact form. All those go to me and one other person. So that's the easiest way to get in touch, is just go to the website. You'll see a half a page description of how this works, because there isn't anything else to say in the other half of the page. It really is recommend us money. Tell us, recommend where to invest it. We'll take care of it.
And we spent how much in marketing dollars last year to recruit donor advised funds to Realize?
We haven't spent any money on marketing yet.
We spent $0, and we'll probably be close to 10 million this year. I mean, total between last year and this year.
Oh yeah, easy.
Yeah, we'll have over 10 million.
Was it 3 or 4 million last year, and we're already up to that already this year.
And so we aim to double it. And you're looking at the sales team right now as Looney and stuff. So
last year I only told 5 people about it till like October last year. Like I told Stephanie, I told the person who runs the trust fund, didn't know the trust fund existed, but I told him, and he's like, oh great, we'll use it. And I told a few other people, and that's it. Like, we did not launch this as a big giant national campaign. We literally spent nothing on it. It was all volunteers.
And so another question from how many native-led fiscal sponsors are there? To my knowledge, I don't know any. I'm sure Looney, I don't know if he knows any either, but we just want to thank OESTA again for including us. Nothing would make us happier, like literally happier, to partner with the 69 native CDFIs and help them unlock their local donor advised fund capital. We think that would be the definition of a really good time. So
individually or collectively, let's go make the native CDFI fund. with a whole bunch of people, or a whole bunch of orgs, or regional.
Absolutely. Thank you, Looney, for joining us today. We're so appreciative of you and everything you do. And I'll hand it back over to our team at OWISA.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie and Looney. I'm so glad that you were able to kind of join us for the convening and present this information. It's so helpful. That being said, everybody, feel free to join our next session. We're going to have a really good discussion with community-based foundations. So yeah, thank you for joining us and hope to see you at the next session. Have a great rest of your day.